Hi, I'm Lynn Langett. Welcome to part 4 of 6 of my screencast series using Google's Cloud for developers. In today's screencast, I'm going to take a look at using command line tools with the Google Cloud. If you've been following along the series, you know a little bit about me. If you haven't, probably the most important thing for this one is that I'm a Google Cloud developer expert as recognized by Google for my community education work. I'm not a Google employee, I'm an independent contractor, but I do work on the Google Cloud and I want to share with you what I've learned so that you can too. So this is part 4 using the command line. We've had 3 previous parts, so if you're new to this, jumping in the middle, and you're new to the Google Cloud, you might want to watch some of those, and they're all linked on a playlist on YouTube. What's coming up after this one will be programming the Google Cloud APIs using Java. There are some other programming languages that you can use, but I happen to use Java, so I'll be showing that probably tomorrow or later this week, and then I'll finish off with learning more and next steps. So let's get started using the command line with the Google Cloud. Generally, this is the flow, so you can get a sense of working with it, and then we'll get into the specific tools here in just a minute. So you want to download the tool or tools, and as you'll see, Google is in the process of updating their tools, so how you get the tool depends on which tool you want to use and which service you want to work with. And then you configure the tools, select a command, run that command, establish OAuth 2.0 or authentication and authorization, which we'll touch on lightly because a lot of it's been automated. One of the improvements in the tools that I've seen over the past year since I last did a screencast on this is Google's made this OAuth handshake quite a bit easier than it used to be with the tools, so they're happy to see that. And then you run the commands. So to get started, you're going to download the Google Cloud SDK, and this is a pretty new set of tools. And notice this is from their website on the note. The Cloud SDK is currently a developer preview and is under active development, which means there will be updates to it. Now that might seem annoying. However, as someone who worked with the command line tools before we had the Cloud SDK, this is an improvement because the idea is to consolidate and to make one SDK, if you will, that contains all of the latest versions of the tools. Previously, you had to kind of maintain all of them and download them and update them, and it was a really big pain. So this is an improvement. Now this runs on Linux or Mac or Windows. Now I'm going to be a little bit lazy here because even though I've been showing you from Windows virtual machine, I actually do have a Mac, and it's simpler and quicker to set this up on a Mac because it doesn't require Cygwin. So I just downloaded it on the Mac, and so you'll see my terminal window popping up in the middle of my Windows VM. So don't be confused. I'm just using a Mac because it was a quicker setup. So I listed some of the command line tools here, and generally all the services have a command line tool. They are Python based, so when you install the SDK, you will get the Python language as well, because that's how they're authored. And some of them, the source code's actually on GitHub if you wanted to extend them or customize them. So just generally we'll be going through the majority of these, although not all, because you'll see the pattern after I go through a couple of them. The new one is gcloud, which gives you authentication, configuration, component management, and as I mentioned, there's development happening with this SDK, so Google has said in the future more cloud developer workflow utilities. So it looks like they're moving a lot of the functionality to gcloud, trying to standardize the command line tools, which is fantastic. And there is an interactive mode in gcloud where you can use Python scripting because it's Python based. I'm not going to bother to show the interactive mode. I'm just going to show sort of the basic functionality, but I wanted to mention that in case you're looking for a scripting tool. GCD is to manage the Google Cloud Data Store. gcloud SQL, and you can see there it looks like that's where they're evolving to. Instead of gSQL, it's gcloud SQL to manage the Google Cloud SQL instances. gcutil to manage Google Compute Engine. gsutil, a little bit tricky there, to manage Google Cloud Storage. AppConfig to deploy to Google App Engine if you want to do that through script, and BQ to manage BigQuery. So those are the ones that I use. There may be more for other services, but I just picked out the ones that I used. So when you work with these tools, what you're going to be presented with is an authentication screen. And I didn't cover this previously, but as we're starting to get into programmatic access, we're going to need to look a little bit more at authentication. Because when we're on the console, in the previous screencast, the Google console, we were signed in with our Gmail, our administrator account. So we were authenticated via that method. Now, when we have these various client tools calling our services, we have to authenticate. And the idea behind authentication is you use OAuth 2.0, and there's various methods, which I have another slide coming up here. But what you're going to see when I call the tools is you're going to see this auth screen. So first of all, you're going to have to accept it. And second, as a developer with the Google Cloud, you're going to want to look at this auth screen and understand what services are being managed by your tool, and start thinking about, when you're writing your own application, how you're going to present auth to your users, if you are, or if you're going to just auth through your application. So it gets us thinking programmatically. So we'll see these auth screens popping up, and I'll talk about them as we do. Now again, just to drill more into this, and I have a link with these slides that I recommend that you read, Google's documentation. Generally, OAuth has two paradigms, and there are more nuances to it, but the idea is that you have an installed application where you get an auth token from Google's servers, and then you get your code and exchange your code for your token and token response, and then use your token to call the Google API. So it's a handshake with your token. Now, if you have a service account, notice there's no user on this diagram. So you have a JSON web token. Use JSON web token to request your token, get your response, and then use the token. So you have this same sort of flow, but it's a token based rather than based on the service account rather than a user, a particular user. This might seem a little bit confusing if you haven't used OAuth. Again, I encourage you to read the documentation. Now, just to get us thinking about this, although we won't see it too much in this screencast, we're going to see it more tomorrow, but I did want to show it to you. I'm going to show you in the developer console where you see the credentials and what process is involved in creating a credential through the developer console. Now again, with our tools, we don't have to do this, but when we programmatically access with client apps that we create, we will have to do this. So we might as well take a look at it. So here I am inside of the Cloud Console. I'm in the Google Compute Engine project that we were looking at previously, and you can see I'm on the API and auth section, and I'm on credentials. And here we have some information about OAuth 2.0, and it tells you what it is. And then I have, just because I've tested a lot, I have various accounts here. So I have accounts with a client ID and an email address set up for use here. And notice I can download JSON for this. And then I have a client ID for a native app. I have a service account, and here's a public API key. If I needed to make any more for whatever client, I would just click Create New Key here. Or if I needed to make credentials for a client ID, I would click here, and then I would have these three different types: web app, service account, or installed app. And again, for using the command line tools, this is pretty, we don't have to do anything here, but because this was one of the areas that I personally found challenging when I was doing writing client apps programmatically, and I see a lot of questions on Stack Overflow, and just I hear a lot of questions about OAuth. I just want to kind of gently introduce the topic before we get into the programming. So this is the section in the developer console where you would work with or view or verify the OAuth credentials. So now that we had the gentle introduction to credentials, we need to get into this. So we're going to start with using the gcloud command. Now, as I said, I've already downloaded on my Mac and set up the tools, which I have to tell you was super seamless. So good job, Google. There's one little exception, which we'll see, but vast improvement over previously. So let's take a look at that. So again, I have all these links in the slides. When you're getting set up, you want to go to developers.google.com /cloud SDK, and you want to download the Cloud SDK and follow the instructions. Really simple. Basically just paste this command in and then restart your terminal and then log in. So if you're using Windows, you do need to download Cygwin and just follow the instructions here. It just takes a little bit longer. That's all it really is. So once you do that, then you're going to start with the gcloud command, and you're going to see over to the left here that we have the gcloud command line information, and I'm just going to be running through this, and I recommend that you do too. Basically, gcloud sets up your authentication, your token, like I just showed you, so that you can start working with various services, and then you can use the services that are installed. So this is a reference for those, and these are part of what you get with gcloud. So things like gsutil, gcutil, app, CFG, gcloud, so on and so forth. Now again, because you're new to this and you might be getting lost in all these googly words, let me just go back to the console because it's a little simpler and remind you we're going to be working with this Google Compute Engine project, which has a project ID of lin-google-compute, and inside of here we have already turned on various APIs like BigQuery and like Google Cloud Storage, and we could use the console to do the actions that we're going to do here because I'm doing really simple things, and I'm actually going to jump back and forth so that you can see. But you would have to have these APIs enabled in your application, which you also could do programmatically, by the way. But again, we're just getting started, so just click the on button on the console, and then you can work with them through the command line tools. So we're going to actually be starting with this in a minute. So let me go back over here, and oh, here's Sigwin as well. So this is if you need Sigwin. And then here's a reference on OAuth, which again I recommend that you read. Okay, that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started. So I've got my terminal open here, and the first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy and paste these because it's going to be super boring if you watch me type the whole time, as I'm just going to put in gcloud. And basically, you can see it's Python, and you have to have some arguments with it. So gcloud is your sort of top level container. So the first thing you're going to do is your auth, which is going to give you your token. So the argument is gcloud space auth space login. Now, what this has done is this has opened a browser, and I actually opened it on my desktop, so I'll move it over here. And there's my auth screen, and you can see it wants to know who I am, view my email, so on and so forth. And these are a list of permissions. And then I'm just going to go ahead and make this a bit smaller so you guys can see it. Scroll down, and I'm going to click accept. And now I'm authenticated, so it passed the token back. Great. So it says you can view your existing projects or create new ones in the console. So again, I have the console open in the background because we're going to be switching back and forth. So we can enter our project ID, or we can leave it blank, not if we don't want to set it. So the project ID, and again, I know I'm being a little tedious, but trying to teach you the new things here, is the string. You might think that it's a number, but it's the string. So lin Google Compute, and I'll just copy this, paste. Okay, and so there it tells me who I am. I'm logged in. Okay, now I could also do, so that's gcloud config list. And you can see that here's my account, there's the project, so I switched it back. And so now I want to see my components, what got installed. You know, I'm actually going to clear this so you guys can see it better. So that's gcloud components list. And again, nicely done, Google. So it shows me which packages are here, and I selected this when I installed it, and then which components were installed. So you can see I've got the App Engine SDK for Java, BigQuery, the core libraries, the admin console for Cloud SQL, gsutil, gcutil. And then some things I have not installed. I don't have the App Engine launcher. And then if I wanted to update, you notice here's the command right here. So really happy with gcloud. I'm sure more functionality is going to be moving into that, and that's a great place to start. All right, so I just listed some of the common gcloud command line examples here, and I'll just use, I have a little text file I made with the common commands, and I'll just reference that in my blog post so that they're all just pulled together if you want to try it out. But these are the common ones, and we pretty much went through all of them. So now that we've set up our auth, we want to get into working with our services. And again, I've set up my project through my console, and I've enabled my services. And I'm going to start with Compute Engine, so gcutil. So to start, you'll see that I have a single instance here, demo lin. So I'm going to go over here and just show you that you can get a list of all the operations if you just type in gcutil. One thing that's always good to check if you have some issue, this is just a troubleshooting thing, let me just clear the screen here, is gcutil version. Now with the Cloud SDK, this should be less of a problem because you might remember it installs with it. So anyhow, let's use this gcutil list instances. So I should have one, right? And there I have one. Okay. So if I want to add an instance, and again, there's lots of switches and parameters, but I'm just doing a real simple thing here, just so you guys can see how it works. So add instances, add instance, test instance lin, and here I select my zone. And I select my machine type, so I'm going to do a small one. And I'm going to select my image. And I'm moving this so I can refresh the screen. Because we know that we are in the super fast world of GCE, which is why we're learning all this stuff, because it's amazing how quickly this spins up. There it is. So now, and notice the information is returned here. Again, if I just clear this out so you guys can see, then I say gcutil list instances. There's going to be 2. And then if I want to get rid of it, I can just get rid of it. So you guys are seeing how slick this is. Works the way it's supposed to. Remove instance. And well, you know what I can do? Remove, delete instance. Ah, don't you love it when I mess up? Delete, yes. Delete the boot disk, yes. And then 3, 2, 1. That's the fun part, isn't it? Oh, there it goes. You can see it. So just for completeness, here's the link to the gcutil documentation. Again, I have all these links in the slides. So we took a look at gcutil, we took a look at list instances, add instance, and then as I corrected myself, delete instance. And you can see that you have the various options when you set up an instance. And as I mentioned initially, you can also script all these command line tools. I'm just running them in the terminal window so you can really see what they do. All right, the next one is going to be very familiar since we've gone through gcutil. Now we're going to look at gsutil with Google Cloud Storage. And in case you're not remembering what Google Cloud Storage is, let's start there. So here I am in my same Google Compute Engine project, and I'm in Cloud Storage. And I have buckets. So this is your blob storage, if you will, so kind of like a S3 in Amazon or Azure blob storage. And basically you have your buckets, and inside of your buckets you have any sort of files that you want to put. And this is your interface is common across all cloud vendors. You can make a new folder, you can upload a file, and you can work with your various buckets. So that's pretty much all there is to this interface. Very, very simple. So notice the bucket names here. And now, of course, we're going to work with our tool, and I'll show you the documentation for the tool, gsutil. Now, it's slightly different in the way the parameters work. You know, we were just on list instances, add instance, delete instances. A little bit different syntax, and that's one of the reasons I'm going through this. So here we are in our terminal, and guess what we're going to do? gsutil, so that we can see the syntax. And you can see that we have a syntax that's more like a Linux syntax, so a cat command. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is gcutil ls. And again, made a mistake, gsutil ls, because we're in storage. We're not in compute engine. And there we go. And just to show you the console in the background, so you can see that those are our bucket names. And notice the syntax gs:\whack. And here we're going to just make a bucket called test bucket lin, which isn't there right now. And there it is. And in order to see it, let's refresh our console. And there it is. And then we're just going to remove the bucket. And refresh our console. And it is gone. So using gs, not gcutil. Again, it's ironic that I made that mistake in the demo because that is a mistake that is easy to make. gcutil for Google Compute Engine, gsutil for Google Cloud Storage. And this is just a screenshot of the things that we did. And now we're going to take a look at BigQuery. BigQuery, as you might remember, is query as a service, and the command line tool is BQ. Our data sets, which are over here, and then we can perform jobs, which is load data, or perform queries. So we have these data sets over here. We'll see if we can examine some of those. So let's just start with our BQ and see what we get. And inside of BQ, again, we have a slightly different syntax, kind of similar to the last one. So MK, create a data set, make ls, list, so on and so forth. But again, you're just going to have to read these because they're all slightly different. That's just the way life is until you figure out what you want to use. And they have some good examples. I like the examples in BigQuery. So here's an example of running a query, a select. Also, they have a shell, which is an interactive session, which I haven't just mentioned. I haven't talked too much about. So now let's say that we want to show information about the data set. Let's see what happens here. So here we have an interesting case of we don't have OAuth credentials. Now we didn't have this with the other two services, and my guess is that this hasn't been quite fully integrated into the Cloud SDK. So perhaps with this screencast I can give Google a gentle prod to complete the integration, because when I try to work with this by using the old method of authentication and paste this into a browser to obtain my token, which is what's happening automatically for the other services, there's my auth window. It says, okay, we need a token here. And it says, all right, great, here's your token. Paste it in, which is being done automatically for the other services, to be clear. Like, okay, I'm happy here. I'm happy. And I pasted my token in. Oh, I'm not happy. So you probably can tell by my tone that I've worked with this in advance. Now, I'm not trying to give Google a hard time, but I do like my command line tool. So I'm having a gentle call out here to the folks at Google, if you could please remedy this situation. And when you do, I'll put a little overlay on the video saying that it's fixed. So let me know so I can update this video. But as of this point, I do not see how to get this working, unfortunately, through this tool. All right, so those are some of the commands from BigQuery. And I just pulled together a few command line examples just to kind of give a little mini flow. So, you're adding an instance of maybe a compute engine, and then maybe you want to work with a SQL instance, and then you want to take data out of the SQL instance, load it into BigQuery, and then you want to run a query against it. I mean, just very, very oversimplified, but just to give you some idea of using these tools together. The next one in the series will be the longest one, and I've been thinking long and hard on how to make it consumable, useful, yet short enough that you guys will have time to watch it. So I'm going to show you programming APIs with Java, probably in the same pattern. GCE Google Cloud Storage, and BigQuery. Again, my call to help the next generation so that they can be working with the cloud. Teach kids programming. You can use my free and open source library. Teach your own kids, teach your neighbors' kids. It's designed for kids ages 10 and up in Java, Small Basic, or we have C# on Pluralsight. And again, I'll mention that at Pluralsight, I've done several courses of a longer length on the Google Cloud. So if you have a subscription, it's a subscription-based video training service. Check it out, or just go get a trial subscription and watch my videos. In particular, I did quite a bit more on BigQuery. I did a full course on that, so if you're interested in it. So thanks for hanging in. A command line screencast. You are officially hardcore. Have a wonderful day.